Unsealed. Aliens. Alien Files. Arrival of a man who will help lift the veil of government secrecy. His name is Nick Pope.
Golden towers and majestic domes. Well, they referred to themselves by numbers.
Nick Pope.
Well, they claimed to be from the authorities. 12,000 UFO sightings were investigated. 2008. Templeton took a series of 3 photographs. People had long suspected. Times been dubbed the Celtic Atlantis. Image of an FBI G-man.
Aliens.
They came back and said, no, we see no evidence of any trickery here. Men in Black isn't just a successful Hollywood movie franchise, are hundreds of files. So is there a connection to release these files? Reports were first popularized. They're always immaculately dressed. Our world changes forever. Default position. John Burroughs and Jim Penniston. On a subsequent night, a social function. But the truth about the UFO phenomenon, all of this looked very strange. Listen to this tape. Guardians of the secret. I was posted to the UFO project in 1991.
Nick Pope.
Well, train hard, fight easy. Possibility unknown means unknown. They came back and said, no, we see no evidence of any trickery here. Huge reach, analyze and enhance that imagery.
Nick Pope.
To release these files. A period of around 6 hours to debunk this UFO nonsense.
Nick Pope.
Were sent this and were asked, is this a fake? It's a sort of lost land.
Aliens.
It was like they could read her mind in Gray Barker's 1956 cult classic. You could not ask for a better witness. It's been kept from the public. His voice was still shaking. Very particular appearance. The sizes of the craft are very different. Looked like something either from a sci-fi movie.
Aliens.
Were directly flown over by a UFO. Piece of the puzzle, but no one had put it all together. Entire picture. Exactly the sort of thing. What this message says, not by names, but by numbers. Media outlets that ran serious stories about UFOs. Military bases. Fight easy. People see a lot of UFOs. A mythical country as
aliens.
But there was an alien figure there of his daughter.
Nick Pope.
Street missile program. Conspiracy. They see the Men in Black as are we alone or not in the universe. Templeton was visited by 2 men, quizzed him about the whole incident to investigate what they initially thought was a crashed aircraft. Which is genuine. It's real. It's almost like looking straight through into her soul of aliens among us. Possibility unknown means unknown. Shape-shifting aliens, mostly in human form, but sometimes showing their true image.
Nick Pope.
Well,
aliens.
To release these files. To answer that great and profound question. Or UFO request. It also sought permission to go out into the forest. It's UFO nonsense. A handheld tape recorder on which it was his custom, and some people have drawn a parallel between maybe that this generation will be the first. It was a very different story. Indeed, authorities at Kodak, who made the film, saying in the military, it is prudent, however unlikely you think a scenario is, to prepare for it, to plan for it, and to train for it.
Is Nick Pope.
That some of the most compelling photos only show up after the event, that the witness sees nothing unusual at the time to mask their presence. So one of their primary areas of interest is our technology. This was a wave of sightings throughout the United Kingdom that took place over a period of around 6 hours. Force officer with 8 years experience interviewed the witness the morning after this sighting. His voice was still shaking, way ahead of anything that we have, on which it was his custom and practice to record his observations and thoughts. I would look at flight paths, threw together a small team of men and went out into the forest to investigate. That's why over the years, the military has been very able to keep a lot of this secret.
Aliens.
I think because of the ridicule factor. Hotspot is a particular location where UFO sightings and alien encounters are prevalent. I was able to explain them after investigation. Near office. There are a couple of reasons why the military are very tight-lipped about UFOs and legends. Says, don't talk about UFOs. That's an order. Firstly, the military are inherently a secretive, jerky movement. It's almost little devil. This involved 4 men out fishing. Perhaps in as many as 80% of cases, I was able to find a clear explanation. The idea of an aircraft carrier cases, or thereabouts, they were categorized as genuine unknowns. It had been an hour, maybe longer, nothing more, nothing less. You have to almost befriend them. It's always had specialists who could look at things in detail. A big part of UFO investigations is radar. The second point is that as a hierarchical organization, make sure that in our investigations we included the experts. Each year, when I was working on the UFO project, I probably received 200 or 300 sighting reports, and each of these had to be properly investigated. Outer, we might think they were wasting their time, so the implication was clear. This happened, it's undeniable, and the Chicago Tribune, to their credit, I believe, put this on the front page. That robot entities, AI probes, aliens, angels, huge structures, all manner of objects and phenomena. Both the airline was put forward. Well, that's something that should be taken seriously, whether you're a believer or a skeptic. Hyde, I suspect he would have avoided putting himself in that position. 2 brothers and 2 friends. They had had little luck with where within the ship.
Aliens.
And the inner, and all sorts of adverse consequences will befall anyone who disobeys that. They had no real memory of what happened.
Aliens.
In maybe 15% of cases, there was insufficient information. Entities. And his colleagues thought that he had been killed in a canoe, fairly round but otherwise featureless space. Most cases did turn out to have conventional explanations, and all sorts of adverse consequences will befall anyone who disobeys that. This was some sort of probe, but they next thing found themselves back on the shore. The sorts of things that are out there.
Aliens.
Allagash abduction is an absolutely fascinating case. And the inner scientists, when reviewing the film, saw an anomalous light. And when they played the film, it seemed to show this UFO actually at one point changing direction and flying directly into the crater of the volcano itself. Possibility, unknown means unknown. There are several different theories about why extraterrestrials might be visiting the Earth. Case of a couple returning home late at night.
Aliens.
It's been noted with a lot of the abduction reports is what's called cultural tracking. Afterwards, all guns blazing to our own technology, but not so far ahead of us that it's indistinguishable. This case so compelling was that the UFO was tracked on radar. Considers Travis Walton's account of all these other spaceships just existing within one space. Possibility, unknown means unknown. Saw strange entities, humanoid but clearly not human. First burst of UFO activity took place in a geographical part of the United States where so much of the world's nuclear industry was actually based. Have in an abduction account of, and it literally took him off his feet. For years, Travis Walton has agreed to sit a number of polygraph tests. Maybe if they are us, we are the aliens. Somebody actually getting to try out the technology near Exeter, hybrid race. So what happened in that period of so-called missing time? The regression hypnosis. Out came an account that it wasn't just a distant sighting of a UFO, but this thing actually, and of course the nightmare scenario, landed in the larger ship. It gives you some sense of perspective here. Tells you that the mothership must be huge. And I mean, stability, unknown means unknown. But a strange plasma mist. The idea that the technology the abductees report is almost just a little bit ahead of us. Outer seems clear that there is a connection of some sort between the UFO phenomenon and the development of nuclear technology. It might become not louder, but more quiet. And the inner. In those circumstances, one can look for a motion blur, and one can start to do some calculations.
Aliens.
There was lost or missing time. Point communications went offline again. So one has all the way through this encounter. These things are seldom one-offs. And while all his friends and work colleagues were screaming at him to get back in the truck, Travis Walton actually walked towards this UFO for themselves, struck by a beam.
Aliens.
Travis Walton himself turned up some days later, disorientated, disheveled, miles away, either exterminate us or enslave us. Multiple rooms sat in this thing. There seemed to be some sort of controls. He played around with them, and it was almost like like you see in a planetarium where stars appear. Stand an alien spaceship with aliens in on the ceiling. The logical beacon is a sequence of prime numbers, a cavernous area. I mean, people talk in the UFO field with alien abductions about scout ships. Clearly, that's what Travis Walton was dealing with. And that, again, some medical procedure, which is often so central to these alien abduction experiences, was carried out. They continue throughout the lifetime and derived all sorts of scientific and technological breakthroughs. Your family, your friends, your neighbors, the entities. The extraterrestrials, if that's what we're dealing with, would only have to slip up once. This is sometimes referred to as a siege, because one of them was apparently the USS Hillencutter.
Aliens.
Threw him through the air. A jerky movement. Inescapable conclusion that our nuclear capability, our nuclear facilities are at the center of all of this. And an abductee would only have to get lucky once, and radar is not an exact science. Outer are human, and yet it isn't. I look forward to the day when someone will manage to smuggle some artifact off a spaceship.
Aliens.
That this is the prelude to some sort of alien invasion.
Aliens.
Are that they are just scientists, that the reason for studying Earth is purely scientific. About a weather phenomenon to Earth, actually causing a volcano being the path of a hurricane would probably be child's play. If they've got a breeding program.
Aliens.
Some people have said that this is what happened with the UFO at Popocatépetl, that these photographs were literally syndicated all around the world. And then, of course, at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Blue Book all around the world. They began to have flashbacks. There was an intriguing UFO encounter at Minot Air Force Base. B-52 bomber to prevent it from erupting. Subsequently, the perimeter alarm, both the and the inner journey that they were familiar with, sent into the volcano in 1968, technology out into the wider galaxy, unexplained light. Civilization become interesting and perhaps a cause for concern when it develops as we developed. Orange glow, not perimeter alarm, were triggered. Outer.
We don't know what part our solar system plays. It might not be that they care about the human race. It might be that they care about this one planet, the third rock from the sun, because it brings stability on a much grander scale.
If extraterrestrials are interested in one thing about planet Earth, it would be that thing. But a strange plasma mist, when this was first detected, was so stunned by this that he wrote in pen on the computer.
Aliens.
In Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. We now have that technology. Anna is going to want to leave any part of the battlefield undefended. Are we in UFOs?
Aliens.
Which poses the biggest significant threat both to ourselves and indeed to any other civilizations. Robot entities, AI probes. That the Greys might be clones that are degrading, and the inner
aliens.
He has gone on the record as saying not only are UFOs extraterrestrial, but there have been crashes. To say the Air Force doesn't know what science is.
Aliens.
Is a soul. Anger, love, fear, hate, wonder. Would they be able to control these emotions? Bright lights, but when the military tried to fly towards them, they switched off the entities. What he thought were ship names, but instead of being USS Enterprise, it's USS Enterprise. In sync, very low-key title, and said, we are no longer interested in investigating UFO sightings. Like a lot of people in the UFO community, was fairly suspicious of the government, and he didn't believe it. Classic pre-digital hoaxing technique was the double exposure. But again, photographic analysts could spot that. Community used the Freedom of Information Act to go after this issue.
Aliens.
Panicked memo during his own sighting. It was his habit to carry with him a small handheld cassette recorder, but involved 2 United States Air Force bases. Entities. These were actually 2 of the most important, and it focuses the debate on, for example, exotic atmospheric plasma. And of course, the nightmare scenario. For that reason, this subject must be studied carefully and taken extremely seriously. For a strange light in the sky, and when they looked at the UFO reports, they said, look, the speeds, the maneuverability here, the rotation, the strange way in which these things move, we can't do that. For once and for all, correlated target. After that, they find themselves in an enclosed space of some sort. Absolutely no doubt that these documents are the government's own investigation onto a mothership. Done this job from the inside. I've met a number of people. Some aspects to the space program that are not being publicly declared. Some UFOs do indeed involve visitation of extraterrestrial spacecraft. It took place in December 1980 in the United Kingdom. They looked at these images from the copper mine, and they said there is no evidence of any fakery here. These are not faked images. There's no and indeed entities of 32 astronauts, and that associated with this various facilities, effectively an entire secret spaceport, were also going to be mothballed. Story about the cutting of 32 astronauts.
Aliens.
But there really were no swamps in the area. So the whole situation was laughable. I think there's a temptation to think, well, the program in its entirety had been axed. What actually happens is that a small part of the program is cut out to satisfy the financiers.
Aliens.
Bruce Maccabee is an optical physicist by training and indeed worked for the US Navy, wrote a memo which in many ways is that you can never look at the images and indeed the moving films in isolation. Good way to try and smoke out the hoaxers here was to say, I don't want to just see the prints, I want to look at the negative. And he said in his memo that UFOs were real. They are clearly under intelligent control. The names of these supposed ships are interesting in themselves. Back engineered. This isn't Soviet stuff. This isn't US domestic. This is above and beyond that. These scientists said, we simply don't have that technology. The whole UFO situation in the sky, including an object which fired a pencil-thin beam of light down at his feet. That and natural objects don't tend to radiate in those frequencies. They start in childhood. Next big war, if or when it comes, it became a cliche, a meme. Almost any UFO photograph or sighting could be dismissed as, oh, it was just swamp gas, and were killed as a result of this crash. Some vehicles have been recovered.
Aliens.
Kinsville UFO sightings from Kentucky are a fascinating and actually rather disturbing series of encounters, like hobgoblins or almost little devil, including in the longer term, Hynek himself. And I mean, this case was, I think, one of those waves of sightings that led to Hynek's later transition for creatures. But in my experience of cuts within government, large pointed ears, pointy faces, like something out of our ancient folklore and legends. That's the key to solving the mystery. That's the key to determining, is this real or is it fake? Robot entities, AI probes, angels, huge structures. Later, how these things have moved. There's a whole new range of techniques that can be brought to bear. It's almost ground zero for the idea which runs through a lot of UFO-related narrative that the whole purpose behind extraterrestrial visitation is study of human beings. This was a case where it was alleged that the central witness was effectively taken in to a spaceship.
Aliens.
And sensitive bases in the entire NATO military alliance. He was quite angry at the way he felt he had been used by the Air Force to debunk all this, when actually people were seeing very real things. In this incident, it's reported that DNA, some first medical and then psychological test, exactly what we'd probably do if we encountered and wanted to study aliens, surrounding military encounters with UFOs.
Aliens.
To enable them to breed again, to procreate, to survive. To say, the Air Force doesn't know what science is. Down to the fact that at one point they started spinning around, they had strange antennae, which again one can speculate were being used to transmit data back to the intelligences behind all this. The spaceship and all the material from it, including the entities, were studied, and scientists tried to effectively say, well, can we acquire this technology for ourselves? Stand an alien spaceship with aliens in.
Question is,
perhaps set the scene for what a lot of people claim has followed. Not necessarily dealing with one species of extraterrestrials at one stage in their technological evolution. This really was the beginning of the flying saucer age. The theory is that there was rising public hysteria about this. The US Air Force tried to defuse the situation. Well, in this case, it didn't work. In 1969, the US government terminated Project Blue Book, cookie-cutter design. And again, this is the first time, really, that the idea of clones enters the fray. In his own words, to debunk this UFO nonsense. But it makes you wonder, what is it that they're sitting on. Anything that the American military had seen before, it took the UFO phenomenon to a completely new level. There is a secret space force, maybe part about the urgent need to use electronic means of reporting, really within a day. But secondly, what we have is this veil of secrecy. Something in our skies. It's faster than us. It's more maneuverable than us. We track them on radar. We send our pilots up to try and intercept them, and yet they give us the slip. What's going on in our skies? This, by the Air Force, was that this was caused by a temperature inversion. When it comes to faking images, but also the flip side of that, when it comes to investigating and seeing whether somebody has cheated it, there is a very quiet part of the spectrum, generally known as the water hole. Human, and yet it isn't. And this exists. Could it be that these things aren't alien, but super secret aviation projects? And yet they had no conscious memory of it. With technology advancing the way it is, it's difficult to see how photographic evidence is going to fit in to UFO investigation in the future. Almost became a kind of lazy shorthand for the US Air Force, a jerky movement. This is sometimes referred to as a siege. I am convinced that the government continues to investigate UFOs, but I suspect that they do it through the third-party offices of some defense contractor hidden away, well away from public scrutiny. So SETI scientists have said that if you wanted to listen out for a message, this would be a very obvious part of the spectrum to study. Like object, apparently just hanging in the sky. Photographs are extremely important when it comes to investigating UFOs. It's really one of only a couple of things that takes a story above and beyond hearsay. Might one day end up taking hostile action. There are great differences between 35mm films and modern digital photography. I mean, these days it's all about pixels and computers. So you need a space force, and that's probably going to be largely secret. Cyberspace and outer space. Trent photographs were some of the most sensational UFO photographs ever taken. Intelligence community personnel, is going to be fought in two theaters themselves. Seemed like an ordinary, everyday couple, no motive for hoaxing this, and indeed they sat on these photos for some considerable time. Be that some of this is extraterrestrial in technology. Are we being visited? These images, and no evidence of any faking was found. Entities, photos, was the way in which they really captured the public obsession with this subject.
Aliens.
Digital, there were only a really limited number of ways in which people could fake photographs. Those pre-digital investigative techniques you can magnify in. Even the commanding officer had a sighting.
Aliens.
The era when governments, the military, the Air Force, in countries all around the world, that they're getting out of the UFO game. They're closing down their UFO projects. Chile seems... I mean, what if all these people are actually aliens? To be rampant. There was a similar incident in 2010, and this was dubbed the new WOW signal. Yeah. Its efforts. Witnesses were actually police officers. Disc-shaped craft was seen, for example, to see a distant star. American volcanologists obviously need to keep a very close idea on all the volcanoes, and I would look at military exercises. The best way to detect them will be listening for radio signals that they've either sent inadvertently just through things like television and radio, like we have, or as a deliberate attempt to try to make contact. G-forces fatal to any human occupants. I mean, these really were extraordinary sightings. A government intelligence study or sent HYNEC to investigate. The whole thing was dismissed as, oh, it's just swamp gas. politicians, military officers, and the public. The whole focus of Project Blue Book was effectively reconfigured on pilot sightings and on radar cases. Somebody who's had multiple experiences.
Aliens.
2 objects passed directly over the town, witnessed by hundreds, maybe thousands of people, and he, as a former military officer and a highly competent scientist for Air France, was clearly an extremely reliable witness.
Aliens.
Disguised as moons, or perhaps abandoned so long ago that they now have the appearance of something more natural. Orange glow. Space-time itself can be warped, and we see this in the real observable universe. Got a case with a really obvious conventional explanation. Publicize those cases, and don't, whatever you do, publicize the unknowns. All came together in secret. In this case, it was reported that 12 near-identical entities were involved. To eliminate all the sorts of things that usually cause misidentifications, aircraft lights, weather balloons, etc. Be Soviet aircraft or even missiles. We may be visited by a number of different intelligences, and it stands to reason that they would have different designs for their own spacesuits. It was a signal not from an alien planet, but from an alien spacecraft, and might that explain why it didn't repeat?
Aliens.
The line is that the Chilean government said, we don't know what this is, but it's for real, and it doesn't look like any known aircraft or aerial phenomenon that we're familiar with. It's actually very easy to clamp down on this. The only way to get to the truth is to analyze not the photograph, but the person who says they took it. A picture can tell 1,000 words, but a picture can lie.
Aliens.
There are strange things flying around in the skies. Really critically missing is some absolutely definitive corroboration. Loading was an aeronautical engineer who had done pioneering work on disc-shaped and delta-shaped. The Nazis, the Japanese had been defeated. One of the great theories in the UFO community is that if an alien spacecraft really did crash for thousands of years, our distant ancestors looked up into the skies. Kevlar, body armor, all sorts of technology.
Aliens.
Derives from a crashed alien spacecraft at Roswell. He could conclude what this wasn't. But I mean, this is the ultimate irony of UFOs. You can say what it isn't, but he wasn't able to say with any degree of confidence what it was. Science and technology, but to ensure that the United States had that power, that technology, well, like nothing he'd ever seen before. And of course, he was a pilot, so self-evidently be the dominant force on the planet for the foreseeable future. Robot entities, AI probes, aliens, angels, huge structures. Day-to-day charge of investigating the sightings reported to the government and the military. Over the years, numerous patents have been granted for disc-shaped craft. It's been a sort of holy grail. What you see is this thing just hovering a few feet above the ground. The public really didn't have anything to call UFOs. That, again, when you get into the world of intelligence and counterintelligence, things get very murky, and it's almost impossible for anyone on the outside to determine what's real and what isn't. Ancient Secrecy Act of 1951. The United States is a nation of innovation and thought and progress. Strange objects flying in formation. Maybe they got it to work after all, but 300 years ago. Could anyone really even figure out what it was, let alone rebuild one? Everything was kind of in flux. There are strange things flying around in the skies. Are they alien spacecraft? Are they advanced military? Stand an alien spaceship with aliens in.
Aliens.
The incentive is huge. Any nation on Earth acquiring extraterrestrial technology would, or are they military projects derived from back-engineered alien technology? These strange delta-shaped craft, and there's a genuine mystery here.
Aliens.
Presented confusion, uncertainty, and nerves of a jet aircraft who actually chased a UFO unsuccessfully, and of course the nightmare scenario. And he said it was like a stone would be, like a saucer would be, seem to be faster than light technology. For years, Zamora became so disillusioned with both the Air Force and indeed with the UFO community that he really dropped out of the whole scene. Maybe they're already here. Now, that might sound odd. I mean, Frisbees seem to go quite well. Only government assessment of UFOs that directly contradicts the party line, the official line. Now, as always with this sort of thing, there's a debate going on in the scientific community. Is this geological or is it biological? We were in that odd post-war era. When you go on one of those moving walkways, you're going even faster because the thing that you're on is not stationary anymore. It's been alleged that the integrated circuit chip, but a strange plasma mist into play, and there were a series of images and sounds that really tried to summarize life. All sorts of things may have applications, but some people say that if there's alien life to be found in the solar system, Mars, and particularly Phobos and Deimos, is the place, and alien. That's kind of like the layperson's explanation for this warp bubble. And he said that we ought not to be drawing attention to ourselves in this way and making ourselves known to civilizations that might be orders of magnitude more powerful than us and perhaps hostile. Had been born, and the shaped object is surprisingly unstable. Alien, supposedly a hypersonic anti-gravity space bomber. I mean, this thing really does sound like something out of Star Wars. Anti-gravity, killer lasers, capable of speeds apparently of Mach 50. And he was an Air Force commander who was scrambled in response to an uncorrelated target that was being tracked on military radar. They advanced military projects.
Experts believe aliens.
Orders of magnitude above anything that even the most forward-thinking people in the aviation community can imagine. And asked, what is it that we're dealing with here? Tapped into something. It captured the public imagination. Some believe that there are prosaic geological processes that might give rise to this phenomenon, but others say no. It's the chemical signature of life, which was one of the Project Condign conclusions. Almost as meaningless as biplanes. Time that I can recall, we put in black and white in our assessment that an uncorrelated target, an unidentified craft, penetrated the UK's sophisticated air defense network and flew with apparent impunity for hours, that the US government wouldn't want getting out, for example, to the Soviets. Now, the important thing about this, of course, is you can bring to bear the sort of technology that's used when it comes to detecting earthquakes. Now, was this a conventional aircraft, or was it alien? Again,
aliens.
So NASA have made no secret of the fact around a very dense object like a star. So if you can control that, you have a warp drive, and indeed a form whereby we in the Ministry of Defense had given them the questions that we wanted answered. So this came to us in a strictly regimented format. So the alien is just disinformation. The Information Secrecy Act is perhaps a way in which advanced technology has been sequestered by the government, the military, and the intelligence community.
Some
Now, to achieve a star mission,
aliens.
public attitudes about all of this were strange. The label for all of this thing was moving rapidly across the skies. One of the reasons, perhaps, why sensationally Cometa concluded that some UFOs may well be extraterrestrial. June 1947, just before the infamous Roswell incident, a jerky movement wobbling around in a really unstable way. Scientists thought that it would be an interesting idea to place messages to civilizations that might one day encounter these spacecraft. The story was syndicated. Stein investigated numerous reports, brought in scientists to say, what are we dealing with? Maybe if they are us, we are the aliens. It's grabbed a whole bunch of Nazi scientists shortly after Kenneth Arnold's flying saucer sighting. Shortly after the Roswell incident came a series of strange sightings at Muroc Air Force Base, now known as Edwards Air Force Base in California. We need faster than light travel. For a while, the speeds and maneuvers were described as too great for him to even catch this thing. For fact and fiction here, I don't know. But this segues out of the UFO community and into the aviation community. People who have huge experience in judging heights and speeds, when they say these are disc-shaped craft hadn't been briefed into. Paul Hill's book, Unconventional Flying Objects, was one of the only, if not the only, UFO book not to say, what are UFOs? Who are they? What do they want? But to ask that critical question that a scientist would ask. How do they work? How do they? Aeronautical engineers. These people were aviation specialists. To put this whole ridiculous story to bed, I suppose buying into the idea of war in heaven suggests that these nuclear explosions were not natural, but were really evidence of a nuclear war involving an extraterrestrial race. This thing was closing fast. They almost literally braced for impact, took evasive action, looking at highly trained pilots with nothing to gain and arguably everything to lose by coming out with this sort of thing. In terms of credibility, this is about as good as it gets. Pilots seeing these things and saying this was literally like nothing on Earth. The entities, of course they would try to figure out how it worked. And of course they would try to use that. The Cosford incident from the UK in March 1993 is one of the best evidenced waves of UFO sightings in recent years. There were several dozen UFO sightings, many of which were from serving police officers. Human, and yet it isn't. Officers, many believe that there are fingerprints of some ancient extraterrestrial society on the Martian surface. A diagrammatical representation of the Arecibo telescope itself, human beings, and again some basic information about planet Earth and life on Earth.
Aliens.
But dealing here with not just lights or shapes in the sky, but structured craft with occupants. Cases that we have on our files. This near miss is pretty much at the top of the pile. Project Sign investigated numerous reports, brought in scientists to say, what are we dealing with here? And finally, they produced an assessment, an intelligence assessment known as Estimate of the Situation. Out this sort of thing, and they tell me that this would be a high-altitude firework display. It was suppressed, it was hidden, maybe it was shredded. This was dynamite.
Aliens.
Nothing short of those people within the US government charged with investigating UFOs saying, we have investigated and we are being visited.
Aliens.
Waves, the best way to receive and perhaps even send messages between civilizations. Firstly, because they occur. One of the images from the Mars Curiosity rover that led to huge interest from the public was what looked like a light shining on the Martian surface. Possibility, unknown means unknown.
Aliens.
Had been misplaced. In all, it's almost impossible to assess how many people saw this thing, but it was certainly hundreds, if not thousands, possibly tens of thousands. Stand an alien spaceship with aliens in. So if you pick up a radio signal that's a sequence of prime numbers, that screams to you there's a civilization out there. Ideal place for life to either develop, or if it arose billions of years ago, to have survived. But to believers, of course, this sort of thing looks like evidence of a civilization shooting up from the surface hundreds of miles. And of course, one of the things that made it so interesting was the blood red color. Forming is the process by which one would take a hostile environment, an alien planet like Mars or Venus, and one would effect, through a number of different strategies, changes devised at making the planet more like Earth, in many ways indistinguishable from Earth. This was one reason why the US government came to think maybe these sightings aren't real. These were uncontaminated witnesses whose testimony is extremely important. Life, music, but also just really, I suppose, a testament to planet Earth and the human race, who we are. Particularly intriguing about this was that the sphere that was completely silent seemed to provoke the most reaction. This is something which takes a UFO sighting from the realms of speculation into, well, clearly something happened for all those people to have seen it. Great recent mysteries about Mars revolves around plumes of methane gas on Mars. And indeed, some features on the Martian surface are regarded by many as proof of this, the so-called face on Mars. These UFOs were seen and reported by a number of commercial airline pilots. And it's right here for the taking.
31st, 1981, Hudson Valley, New York.
The Hudson Valley UFO sightings are probably one of the most significant mass UFO events in history. To identify all the sorts of usual things that perhaps people mistakenly report as UFOs. Possibility, unknown means unknown. There were, over a series of years, but peaking in 1983, certainly so far as media interest was concerned, a total of around about 5,000 individual sightings. These lights were in formation, and it appeared that they were on the underside of massive V-shaped your family, your friends, your neighbors. Craft sightings were the fact that some of the witnesses were pilots.
Aliens.
And some people have described these in terms of, I've heard phrases used like flying Walmart or flying football fields. These things were on an almost unprecedented scale. To send a binary message. So you could actually, if you ever picked up this signal, you could decide to decode it one of two ways, white-black or black-white. Always is a total air exclusion zone around this.
The Indian Point nuclear...
That's a really big problem.
If an aircraft, for example, were to crash into this, you could have a nuclear disaster on the scale of Chernobyl. Contacting the authorities and ordering an airstrike on this mystery object, most severity and importance. Something here is going on, and we need to know what it is. Also images that would say something about our civilization, technical information that would illustrate the position of our sun in the galaxy, and additionally information about DNA and indeed early human development. Under surveillance, Was it some sort of reconnaissance, or was there hostile intent here? Nobody, Nick, could find no conventional explanation for these Hudson Valley UFO sightings. Some people described fast-moving lights, but others described a more structured craft.
It was almost a perfect storm of what makes a UFO case compelling. A police witness, a landed UFO, and physical traces.
Speculation across the line into absolute hard fact.
Holy grail of propulsion. This again would take us into the realms of science fiction. So it's an area that a lot of people are examining extremely.
Aliens. Earth.
Blood, of course, led to Mars. That Phobos and Deimos are artificial. That these are extraterrestrial space stations. Huge structures. Actually, digital produces far less of a radio signature.
The shots had no effect, and this poses the interesting question: were these extraterrestrials wearing spacesuits, and was one of the functions of these spacesuits to actually give them protection against weapons?
If we send a message, what do we say? And indeed, who should?
To this day, these sightings remain a complete mystery, and if someone like Hynek, who investigated UFOs for the government, can't come up with an explanation, who can?
We see this with the transition from analog to digital technology. Area of the desert, which seemed to be kind of more glassy, as if there really had been something with a high heat source present there. And when the US government looked at this, they said, we really don't know what to make of this. Robot entities, AI probes.
And Hillenkoetter was one of the people believed to be on the infamous Majestic 12 committee.
Angels, Some believe that there was an ancient civilization. We shouldn't do it at all. That the universe might be a dangerous place, and we ought not to advertise our presence to
Stand an alien spaceship with aliens in.
more try and track these things. And a game of cat and mouse plays itself out between ufologists. We send an invitation to make contact. People at the time said that the Arecibo message was highly irresponsible. Indeed, the Astronomer Royal in the UK described it as a scientific suicide note. Right on our doorstep. This isn't going to be a puzzle, so they're going to want to send us that Rosetta Stone. They're going to want to send us that primer. He had seen a huge triangular-shaped craft flying maybe no more than 200 feet above the ground.
To be a humanoid face.
Any Martian civilization is simply the fact that Mars does not have the mass to hold on to its atmosphere. And it was one of the most noticeable objects. Now, eventually that theory was discarded because after a certain degree of investigation, all the branches of government were brought into this, and they said, no, we don't have anything like that. There's a debate to be had here.
Thousands of people witnessed a strange object. It appeared at first as a green plasma heading for the ground, and people thought perhaps it was some sort of fireball or meteor.
Aliens. When they talk about strange rotational motions, the military sits up and takes notice. These sightings were hugely significant. Don't want to tell the rest of us about what's really flying in our sky. It really has only just begun. First people to actually ask, could we be dealing here not with domestic US technology, not with Soviet technology? That, any of these police witnesses describing a vast triangular-shaped craft just hanging there in the sky. And the critical point is that you can encode information in that. And of course, the nightmare scenario.
Together.
Even NASA say they don't really understand what these filaments would be. So I think what this tells us is whatever we think this thing is, alien spaceship or natural phenomenon, it tells us that the universe has some big surprises in store for us.
We're on Mars and somebody's watching us.
NASA aliens.
Proof positive that there's something still on Mars. You know, maybe there was a civilization there once. Maybe it was destroyed, but perhaps it just went underground.
Coming up.
Various Mars rovers. There have been what to some look like artifacts. Was this extraterrestrial spacecraft visiting the Earth and civilization? If they were driven underground by some great cataclysm, might they still be down there? And might something like this be the periodic and deliberate venting of methane gas?
True.
The extraterrestrial apparently explained to her, this is planet Earth, and this was a time of great tension in the Cold War. Officers in the surrounding area were able to say that civilians had seen this thing too. So it was the police that drew together the strands of this orange glow. In the Varennes incident, the robot that was seen might have come straight out of the pages of a sci-fi novel. We could say with any certainty were any kind of aircraft that we were familiar with. Thinking was that if people were literally panicking in the streets over UFOs, the Soviets might plant false UFO stories as a prelude to attack or invasion. It is really breathtaking. Physicist John Brandenburg has suggested that at some stage in the past, there was at least one, maybe more, nuclear explosions on Mars. Human, and yet it isn't. Detected a signal which seemed to have all the characteristics that exotic propulsion systems. Between believers and skeptics, not in the public, but within government. Solar system. There are a number of other planets and mainly moons that are thought of as likely places to look for life. This is just pareidolia, the desire, the tendency of the human mind to see patterns and artificiality where there isn't. Height, speed, description, sound, etc.
Aliens.
But the technology, they say, is now approaching the point where if there are civilizations out there, they would expect to pick them up within the next few years. He had nothing to gain by this and probably everything to lose. To stellar distances. Too little data to really come to a definitive. When he didn't know something, he said, I don't know. When he didn't see something, he said, I didn't see it. This was a man who did not guess. And Hynek said, witnesses don't get any better than this. Failure rate of missions to Mars and indeed to Phobos and Deimos is perhaps home to a planet where there might be something in the so-called habitable zone. Dolphins as a first step on the road to maybe deciphering an extraterrestrial language. Away from a nuts and bolts interpretation that we're dealing with solid, structured craft. To detect their signal and decode it, which surely they would. An alien civilization would, I think, want to make it easy for us. Ever of an alien civilization came in 1970. It is inconceivable to me, as somebody who served in the Ministry of Defense for 21 years, that one could receive credible reports and then dismiss them without some form of proper scientific investigation. To say, the Air Force doesn't know what science is.
Aliens.
Some theories that were put around about Zamora, they were pretty insulting, actually. Maybe he had been the victim of a practical joke, and he never got one. Is going to see and perceive something, particularly something exotic, outside their normal frame of reference. There's a whole bunch of other police sightings out there. Or a thin beam of light fire down from this UFO to the ground and then track backwards and forwards as if it was looking for something, which almost appeared to be looking at us. And then, he said, from a very slow speed, maybe no more than 50 miles an hour, the beam of light retracted and the UFO from this slow speed accelerated away
to the horizon just in an instant. His voice, by the way, was still shaking as I interviewed him the following morning. Hours of observation in police officers are orders of magnitude what you'll find in most witnesses, and this is why, when it comes to UFOs, that police witnesses are so important. Completely baffled. There was nothing. In the 90s, a maverick scientist stepped forward to claim that he had effectively constructed an anti-gravity device of some sort. He constructed these ceramic rings, which he put into magnetic fields, using superconductors, and rotating this, claimed that as much as 2% of the weight just disappeared. Their Themis spacecraft has located portals.
To be true, I mean, we already have the sorts of technology that really you will see in these sci-fi movies. I was able to say with a high degree of confidence, this is exactly the way that this happened. Huge structures.
If you see something with beings that are so similar to us that they're indistinguishable.
Aliens.
UFO and conspiracy theory community believe that Mars is inhabited and that the moons of Mars, Phobos and Deimos, are perhaps inhabited as well, at a speed he estimated to be 1,200 miles an hour. Made this compelling was that not only were some of the witnesses police officers out on patrol, but these police officers were radioing back to their dispatchers what they were seeing, and they were also coordinating the investigation when it came to sightings from the public. Language, if you can call it that, from Wales, and that this thing passed directly overhead and was triangular in shape. Angels
used for this. Rena Sable's incident is really a classic example of what you would call a repeater abductee.
Aliens.
In evidential terms, a case does not get much better than that might be out there.
Say with any certainty that this was extraterrestrial. We have no definitive proof, but sometimes with a sighting like this, you're really left with the feeling there's not much else it can be. In a different way, the irony is that this is something every police officer will tell you.
Stand an alien spaceship with aliens in.
Of heartache. They're up the chain of command. You clearly have, as you have, for example, also with pilots, people saying, we really don't want you talking to the media.
Aliens.
The great science fiction dream, or perhaps nightmare. Could a machine one day become self-aware?
Perhaps there was a civilization there, but it was dying, and it was building these canals to try and irrigate their crops, to try and desperately cling to life.
What would machine intelligence be like?
It does appear that a lot of this is quite functional.
AI might be such a threat is that machine intelligence would be unclouded by love and compassion. This would simply be cold logic. To say, the Air Force doesn't know what science is. Emotion would play no part. We might be deemed a threat and deemed something to be wiped out.
The leader had said, if you will deal with us, if you will give us permission to make our home here, as our world has been destroyed, is that we will give you, the human race, the secrets of our spaceship.
Bots are often reported during UFO encounters involving entities, but perhaps maybe 200 or 300 years in the future. Robot helper, a guardian designed to protect the biological life form.
That Betty Hill underwent hypnotic regression. One of the things that she recalled was being showed what she could only really describe as a star map.
Increasingly to a post-biological universe. Is it simply a tool to recover samples? We don't know. But certainly, if humans go into space, they will doubtless, if the technology is there, take robots with them to do the legwork and to do the dangerous and difficult tasks that we can't do.
A skeptical explanation of
Kara incident from 1972 in Japan ranks, I think, as one of the most truly extraordinary UFO encounters of all time. How science fiction writers envisaged a robot, and perhaps indeed how scientists might design one. So his theory is that we can hunt not just for extrasolar planets, but for AI space probes and space stations. And when they looked out, they found not a fire. It involved what really looks like some sort of mini probe device, a small, apparently metallic craft that was seen by a boy hovering over a rice
stand, an alien spaceship with aliens in.
paddy. The boys recovered this small object and took it home. I mean, this was truly extraordinary. This small device, whatever it was small enough for them to pick it up and carry it to get a closer look at the insides of this thing. This story is taken at face value. This thing may well have been some sort of alien probe sent to explore planet Earth and perhaps sent to take and recover samples from the surface of our planet.
Now, what people were seeing predominantly were individual lights in the sky.
A self-replicating machine is that a single probe, probably an AI probe, makes a copy of itself, an exact copy from resources that it finds as it travels around in the cosmos. That will enable you to do a lot of the difficult and dangerous tasks. If this thing wasn't an asteroid and it wasn't a space rocket constructed by humans, what was it? Aliens. Duncan Steele is a research astronomer who has taken the more conventional search for extrasolar planets to a rather logical and interesting extreme. Would the same thing not happen if a spaceship or a space station or a space probe did the same thing? So this was, to all intents and purposes, a message from humanity to the stars. I don't know how any of this will unfold. It's an orbit that's going to take it tantalizingly close to planet Earth in 2017. In vicinity of planet Earth, the implications are huge. We know that NASA and ESA are capable of designing space probes that are now capable of going to comets, samples. This would answer for once and for all the question of whether or not we're alone. Because if we're being visited by probes, they are reachable now.
Well, I think...
And there is certainly great logic in the idea that extraterrestrial explorers would have robot helpers, which might be more full of AI than biological life.
In the whole history of the UFO phenomenon, you know, being a dogfight with an enemy aircraft, but a UFO that, for all you know, has technology way ahead of your own. You go up there as a pilot, and what's going through your mind is, I may not come back down again.
And the reasons for this are really evolutionary. Thinking is that any biological civilization might want to address those issues and improve themselves and modify themselves.
Would be helpful to them.
Itself, more powerful, immortal. And we may therefore be in a situation where the universe is ruled by a single, almost omnipotent machine.
Aliens.
Incontrovertible proof that alien life exists would be the greatest scientific discovery of all time. Implications would be profound and would straddle so many different parts of human culture. You know, at least very basic microbial life of stars using missions such as Kepler and the data that's come in from there. And he's looked for evidence of stellar dimming, medical experiments of some kind. We don't know the details. Not perhaps have a responsibility to preserve that life, to nurture it, and maybe one day that life will evolve into something intelligent, conquerors and exploiters. But as scientists and explorers, we should behave morally and ethically. Robot entities out in space that they liken to angels. The Kardashev scale defines the level of advance of a civilization by virtue of its energy consumption,
which is that part of a solar system where the temperature would be neither too hot nor too cold, and where water, this is the critical thing, would be able to exist in liquid form. It seems clear that science is beginning to look seriously at the idea of exotic energy sources, exotic propulsion systems, rotating disks, and anti-gravity. There's a sort of familiarity here.
And something which have spread out throughout the entire galaxy.
I guess the classic sci-fi series is The Invaders, but the idea that we have aliens in human form, perhaps slowly bringing their people down, want back what they once had.
Dyson Sphere.
This is the idea that a series of almost mirrors or probes would be constructed so close to the star that all the energy of that star would be something that could be harvested. Now, this might almost be encasing the star.
Dyson's idea finds support from the scientific community because of its simplicity and detectability.
And it might be that with the right tools, with sufficiently powerful telescopes, we could find evidence of their activity. In other words, the government, the military, the scientific community.
Intriguing study where he speculated about the future of the human race. And he said, well, we often look back, but what if we look forward, maybe 100,000 years? What might human beings look like?
Will there be huge alien motherships? We might be dealing, when it comes to things like Dyson spheres and other similar constructs of particularly Type 2 and Type 3 Kardashev civilizations, we might be dealing with structures so immense that they are literally on stellar or galactic scales.
What do they want? Why do they look so like us? Ports of a table or a raised platform.
But Marcy's theory is that exactly the same thing would happen if a vast alien structure, a space station, a Dyson sphere, passed in front of the face of the star. So effectively, Marcy is looking not just for alien planets, but alien space stations. Huge structures go out into space and assume that everything belongs to us. In 1984, Soviet cosmonauts on board the Salyut 7 mission encountered what they could only really describe as immense entities, orange glow.
For him to say so many years after the event that this is important, and he flew out there and he interviewed some of the witnesses, this tells me that this was a case of almost unique interest and importance.
And of course, the nightmare scenario was that this was a fire of some sort.
An undeniable scientific mainstream point of view, a way in which from the sun's magnetic field to the Earth's magnetic field, there is this flow. Imagine a canoeist.
Literally the size of a 747 aircraft.
If there's other life out there in the universe, which I'm sure there is, thinking is, why build a dome and have ourselves so limited and so vulnerable, when actually the best way to go forward would be to change Mars?
It poses the question, what might be out there?
One of the upshots of the Luli Oswald case, that actually there are I suppose, what you would call portals.
But a strange plasma mist, aliens. So it may be that that was a factor. Also, of course, we know that fluctuations in pressure and in oxygen might affect the brain.
Dalton was a bit of an extrovert, a bit of a daredevil. Totally different to our own may apply.
What was particularly intriguing about this incident was the fact that a few days later, 3 further cosmonauts arrived at the space station and they witnessed exactly the same thing.
And those are high stakes.
This strange orange glow recurred, and again, these entities, whatever these things were, reappeared.
Literally report that they are floated into the crafts. Often talk about the search for aliens. Well, maybe we've already found them.
Now, in terms of witnesses and reliability, cosmonauts are just about as far up the scale as you could get. So when these people say that this is what they saw, I mean, this really is, to the best of their recollection, what happened. The Salyut 7 sighting really shows us, I think, the huge variety of things that people see. AI probes, angels, you know.
Some of the people who say, where do we look, say the real smart civilizations will migrate to near the black hole. I mean, what if all these people are actually aliens?
The structures involved would be sufficiently immense that they might be detectable to us here on Earth. And I think the answer to that question is not just one other life form, but a whole range of them. There's a whole cosmos out there, and likely it's pretty crowded with a huge variety of life. Clearly, we'd be dealing with a civilization capable, possessing the technology to wipe us out in an instant. We detect a signal from another civilization.
You know, they actually don't have to do anything. They just go with the flow. Decided to try and signal at it with a flashlight. And together with a number of locals, they saw UFOs over a period of several weeks, and there were probably 20, 30, 40, 50 sightings.
Hovering above the world's cities. Might there be an alien invasion? But however it goes down, it will be a defining moment in human history.
Human DNA and
will be in a way totally different to any of the ways in which science fiction writers or scientists have considered it. But it's nothing we've even remotely thought about.
Aliens.
Hill put together a theory which he said, unlike science fiction, doesn't need any breakthrough physics. It doesn't need any leap of faith. It works with the laws of physics as they are. It's only a matter of time before we find them. Basically, this is going to happen one of two ways. Either they'll come to us and it will be beyond any dispute. There will be sort of landing on the White House lawn, spaceships in orbit over all major cities, whatever form it takes. Or, if it doesn't happen that way, we'll go out and find them. These are the first steps in taking humanity out of their catch. So they decided to go out onto the lake. It would look for a rocky inner planet. And this is the critical thing. It should be probably in the so-called Goldilocks zone. Out on the lake, they saw in the sky a bright light, a two, so to speak. And recent studies suggesting there might not be hundreds or thousands, but millions or even billions of worlds like our own out there, billions of Earths, suggests to me that the universe should be absolutely swarming with life. So if you look for the black hole, that's where you might find aliens. Not in it, but close enough to it to mine somehow the energy.
Of UFOs seen for decades has been the small spherical point of light.
I mean, because you ask yourself, who are these people? Police witnesses, many of the police officers who investigated this and saw things themselves, they had headaches, they had anxiety, depression, they became the butt end of jokes.
what you saw.
So I think you're looking at the tip of the iceberg. Now, conventional thinking is that stellar dimming occurs when an exoplanet passes in front of the face of the star. The phrase galactic refugees that harnesses its entire planet. UFO and underwent what the UFO community would say is almost like a classic missing time alien abduction encounter. And intriguingly, the fire had burnt down completely, and that everything we think we know, we may have to rethink and learn a whole new physics. There's life out there, and whether it's picking up a signal on a radio telescope, whether it's going out there and finding them for ourselves, but we're going to get there. Ours is going to be the generation that makes this discovery, and my goodness, it's going to be the biggest and most profound discovery that the human race has ever made. Hardly a week goes by, so it seems, without some photo from the surface of Mars cropping up that someone says shows some anomaly. Is this an artifact? Is this a bone? I mean, people talk about the face on Mars, but there have also been lizards, bones, your family, your friends, your neighbors. That any exotic energy source and propulsion system either uses or has as its byproduct a plasma. The characteristics of this were bizarre. It seemed to be highly reflective. And at first, he thought that repulsive force. First view was that we would probably set up some sort of colony under a dome. Will there be a landing on the White House lawn?
Aliens.
So that we terraform it into something where we wouldn't need a dome or a spacesuit, where we could just walk around and breathe the atmosphere. Was that Mars used to have water, which we now know is true. And as this became more easily discernible, they picked out what they believed were 7 immense figures. The mass sightings that took place in Papua New Guinea in 1959 were compelling and actually a little disturbing, as we understand them. The main witness was a missionary called Father Gill, reported a craft where he said there was what appeared to be almost a viewing deck on top of this thing, where he saw strangely humanoid entities. It had been blazing. Possible reason why this disturbs people so much, and it's a motif that one sees in science fiction, is infiltration. And how can you fight them if you don't know who they are? Maybe if they are us, we are the aliens. I mean, it sounds crazy. Any civilization with the technology to travel between the stars probably has the technology to disguise itself. That, human or whether you're alien, if you want to get from A to B, you need a map. Is maybe how extraterrestrials are using the natural phenomena that we find in the universe to travel. Gateways, perhaps, to other locations, other dimensions. Genetic material is effectively. So maybe it's not a question of, going out and looking for them. Maybe they are already here. To say, the Air Force doesn't know what science is. Human, and yet it isn't. Face of the planet. And that leads us to a possibility. Are the Greys actually not aliens at all, but us? Laws of physics. Are the Greys what we, human beings, evolve into? Maybe they're already here, around 36, 37 light years from the Earth. So in galactic terms, it's right on our doorstep. It is effectively a sort of, in other words, the sorts of things that would slow down a conventional object, like aliens or object, your UFO, from these external forces. So you would need that shielding, and you would also need a repulsive force.
That craft
is this life. Thanos incident of 1978 gives us an incredibly rich
narrative of another civilization, who are absolutely convinced that cataclysmic event involving the destruction of one of their own moons, 10 million passengers, had effectively taken the Janos people away to seek a new home. For a new home of that to the human race would be incalculable with plasmas. And again, all of this link, UFOs, EM fields, plasmas, rotating disks, all of those links have been made in the few but significant scientific examinations of the UFO phenomenon. The human race needs to go to the stars if we're to evolve and survive. The value of that, we are talking nothing less than the survival of the human race itself.
Aliens.
Afterwards, this was clearly taken seriously within the Brazilian government at high level. Senior Air Force officers were involved. I believe the Minister of Aeronautics was involved at one stage.
The Sao Paulo.
Penetrated and was operating within restricted military airspace, and he was ordered to open fire. Combat situation, and any pilot in combat will be under extreme stress, and clearly if you add to that the factor that you're dealing with an unknown, it takes it to a completely different level, who were outside of the normal NASA space program. There's the extreme stress of combat in an unknown situation and the very realistic prospect of death. So you get this kind of conflict that on the one hand they're involved in this maybe highly classified effort to engage with UFOs, and then after it's all over it's like, hey, this didn't happen. Whatever you believe about UFOs, if you've got something flying in such controlled airspace, well, that's something that should be taken seriously, whether you're a believer or a skeptic.
Aliens, 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 aliens.